Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So I actually tried to film this video before and it failed because I was so unwell at the time, but it seems to have been perfect. I don't know what the word I want is. It seems to have been serendipitous because now that I'm getting around to actually filming it, it has just snowed. Unfortunately, because of the white balance in here, you can't see it even though I placed myself in front of it. There you go, if I get out of the way. There it is, I promise. It's very snowy. So it is the perfect time to talk about the 10 books that I think just feel like winter. These aren't necessarily books that are set at winter or have particularly winter themes. It's more just vibes. So I hope you'll go with me here. I have videos about books that feel like spring, summer and autumn, where I will leave a link to the playlist in the cards above if you want to go and check those out. But without further ado, let's get into these 10 wintry books, or at least wintry to me. First one on my list is My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. Now I'm not sure which season this is actually set in, but something about the way Elizabeth Strout writes Lucy Barton's voice makes me feel like winter. My Name is Lucy Barton is the first in the Waubgeshig series, and this is about her when she is in the future, writing about a time when she was in hospital for a very long time and her mother came to visit her. And as this unfolds, you hear about her childhood and her experience growing up in extreme poverty in a family that had lots of secrets, and those are slowly uncovered over the course of the book. Although that sounds like it's plottier than it is, and it's definitely not. It's definitely Lucy telling you the story of her life. She also talks about her marriage to her husband William, which I think has ended in the book, and her daughters who are grown up, but her time when they were children as well. And she jumps about in time just telling you her story, but particularly centred around this time when her mum came to visit her for the first time since she moved to New York, and also about her life as a writer. And it is a really wonderful, cosy book, which I think makes it perfect for this time of year. And one that is also deceptively simple. It feels just like a woman telling you a story, but there is so much more to it than that. Lucy lets you into the fact that she is very clearly constructing this story, and she also doesn't let you into all of the secrets. There are moments where you have to read between the lines to understand what has gone on. It is a very readable book. It is one that I read in a couple of days, and I definitely think you could read it all in one sitting. It has that warmth to it, but there is a distance and a slight coldness to it that I think is what makes me feel like winter. It has that combination of coziness and coldness that feels like this time of year to me. And I think I love that you can read it on so many layers, so you can really take your time with it as well if you want to and get really absorbed. And I think, although I haven't reread it, it is a book that would really do well on rereading. Next on my list is The Crow Road by Iain Banks, and this is another book that sort of slowly unravels secrets as it goes on. It is set in Scotland, which I think is partly why it has wintry vibes for me, because although it is obviously not always winter in Scotland, it's definitely a country that I think of that way, despite the fact that I have only ever visited in August. The Crow Road is another story of a family that has a lot of secrets, told from the perspective of one of the boys as he discovers something, of one of the children as he discovers something about his parents' generation. So it is told in 3 different time periods, and we have the younger boy who is contemporary with when the book was written, which I think is the 80s or perhaps the 90s, as he is in his 20s, and then we go back to when he was a child and his parents were in their 20s, and then also further back to when they were in their teen years, and we slowly uncover a secret. Things that this family has been hiding from one another. It is a really wonderfully written book that has a lot of humour in it and a really strong voice as well. I think that is another thing that gives me wintry vibes, is the feeling of someone telling you a story, which is true of both Lucy Barton and The Crow Road. I also feel like it's set a lot at parties, like winter parties, and there's a lot of drinking, and I think there is a festive feeling around it. I think that Hogmanay plays a part in the plot as far as I remember. It is quite a small story that very much focuses in on this one family and the people around them, and I really enjoyed all of the characters. I thought that they were very well developed and their relationships to one another. It is easy to follow and it makes you feel like you know all of these people and their family friends as if you have spent time at these parties. It has a darkness to it as well. There is, like I said, these family secrets that tend towards the darkness. And there is quite a plot in this one as well that does slowly build up. I think if you are a fan of literary crime, then this would be a book that you would enjoy, because it has a similar vibe to that. Beautiful writing, well-developed characters, but mysteries to be uncovered and people hiding things from one another. A kind of psychological darkness that I think if you like literary crime, you would really enjoy. One that is definitely set in winter is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. And this is set over the course of 3 days in 1918 during the flu epidemic. We follow Nurse Powers as she travels into work where she is working as a nurse on a makeshift maternity ward. This is a maternity ward for women who have the flu, so they have to be separated from the standard maternity ward, and Nurse Powers is, for a lot of the time, the only medical professional there. There is also a skivvy named Birdie who has never worked in a hospital a day in her life, and a doctor who comes in tangentially. It's a very interesting book because it is so short and it covers such a short span of time, and yet it manages to pack in a lot of Irish history. It talks about the Catholic Church and its relation to women and children, to illegitimacy, and to mother and baby homes. It talks about the medical treatment of women in Ireland particularly, and talks about pelviotomies and the amount of children women were expected to produce. It talks about queer relationships, and it talks about the effect of the First World War, and it also talks about the 1916 Easter Rising, as there is one of our characters has been involved in that before, and that does sort of come tangentially into the plot as the ramifications of that play out. So it is a really interesting book that, for such a short space of time, manages to put so much in. It is set in winter, and her travelling to and from on the bus in the cold is a big part of it. But it does also have a lot of very in detail medical descriptions. So if you are grossed out by body stuff, I wouldn't read this, particularly if you don't want to read about hands and birth and reaching in to pull out placentas. If that would put you off a book, I would not read this one, because it does go into graphic detail, and there is a lot of loss and death in this book. It is one that made me cry. So beautifully written, such well-developed characters, evocative of the time period and of the feeling of pandemic. Another type of book that definitely makes me feel like winter is a gothic fiction, and one of those that I really loved is The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sarah Collins. This is a bit of a slight different twist on a piece of gothic fiction because it is written from the perspective of a black character. So at the beginning of the book, Frannie is writing from her cell where she has been charged with murder of her of the man who was in charge of the household where she was a servant. She is writing a confession of what actually happened, sending it back to her childhood in Jamaica on this plantation where experimentation and things are going on that is really to the furthest limits of human brutality. We see her travel to England and be basically, even though slavery is illegal, be sold to a man as a servant, but she is sold to him, so it is basically a continuation of slavery. And we see her treatment in this household. Her treatment was different in Jamaica as it is when she gets to England. Her involvement with this family, the wife of whom is considered to have poor mental health and to be a failed woman, and so we see some of the treatment of women, but also the class differentials and the race differentials there and how those impact things. There is also queer relationships in here, so there's a lot of different things that you wouldn't read in a traditional gothic novel, but it has all of the other trappings of a gothic novel, of that darkness, of the mystery and the uncovering of a mystery, of the close setting of this house, of characters and not knowing who to trust. Those are all parts of this book. Frannie's experience of early 19th century London as she moves into different phases of her life there, and her relationship with a boxer who was involved in the emancipation movement. So there's a lot going on, a lot again packed into this book, but I think the atmosphere is one of the things I really loved about it. It is such a great social conscious gothic novel. It manages to marry the two together without it feeling like it falls down on either side, which I think is great. And yeah, it really gets into that kind of dark Victorian novel in the way that I think a lot of people enjoy in a winter at this time of year. Another one that I think feels kind of gothic and definitely feels wintry because of the setting is The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. This is set on Finnmark, which is an island off the north coast of Norway in the 17th century. This is a small isolated community which is, at the beginning of the book, a fishing accident happens that kills most of the men in the area, and so it is mostly women and children who are left having to learn to fend for themselves. The Danish king, who is in charge of Norway at the time, is sending out in the people to find examples of heresy and witchcraft, and one of these people ends up going to Finnmark, bringing with him his new wife, and the story slowly unfolds of witch hunting and of darkness. But from the perspective of one of the women who lived on the island and of this new wife, we alternate between their two perspectives, and we see there is a huge amount of tension in this book as these women try to survive without men, doing things that are traditionally masculine, but there are, because of small communities, there are always those cliques and the distrust between different parts of the community, particularly because there is a Sami woman who is living in the community, and so there is the prejudice against the Sami woman and the people who are part of her family, and the women who embrace the more masculine side of things, and the women who think that this is ungodly. And when this man of God, who is a witch hunter, comes to them, that these divisions deepen and people turning on one another. It's a very, very tense book. It's another book with queer relationships in, which seems to be a theme, but it is another one that is really, really atmospheric, really, really beautiful, really feels very slow moving until all of a sudden everything feels very quick towards the end. This kind of feeling of terror and dread of what is going to happen really overtook me whilst I was reading this book, and I think it did such a good job of evoking that. It's a really wonderful, as I said, atmospheric book, and as it is set in the Arctic Circle, it is definitely one with a winter vibe. Another one that's certainly set in winter is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig Rice. And this is set in a Anishinaabe community in Ontario, I think, and they are a small community and they are used to the snow. In northern Ontario they are used to the snow, and they are used to the things that they have to store for winter and storing food for winter, and their traditional ways of living, which is helpful because all of a sudden 2 young people from the community who had been studying in southern Ontario arrive on skidoos and say that civilization is basically breaking down. The phone lines and the internet has cut off in this small community, but that happens sometimes because of weather, so no one was that concerned, and all of a sudden they find out that the electricity is going and they have to use generators, and they start to hear that there is something coming from down south, and so it's about this small community and how they survive, and suddenly outsiders arrive as well, people not from the community, and those who are not used to surviving this type of winter and without the resources of the city, and who demand help from the community. And it is a horror book. There is a feeling of terror and tension going on when we don't know what's going to happen. There is death that happens in the community, and there is also a almost mythical feeling to it as well, that as our main character has dreams and how those dreams relate to the potential future for the community and to what is happening outside. I'm not really usually an apocalyptic person, but I always love books about small communities, and I think that it being set in such a small community and none of the apocalypse really coming to the fore in terms of like scientific, like sci-fi stuff, it's very much a personal story, and as it is set over the course of a winter, it definitely has that feeling of blankness, and the danger of the winter is a really big part of this one, which I think, as someone who lives somewhere where the winter is not anywhere near as dangerous as that, it really added to the sense of fear and trepidation. And it is a story that it resounds with metaphorical resonances or historical resonances of outsiders coming and demanding resources. One of the first books that I read on this channel was Braised Pork by Iain, and I don't know if this is set in winter, but again, something about the cold, disconnected style of the writing really gives me winter feels. This is set in Beijing, and it is about a woman whose husband dies. She finds him dead in the bathroom one morning with a picture of a fish man next to him, with the top half of a fish and the legs of a man, and she kind of comes undone and unravels after this, trying to work out what the mystery of the fish man is, but also her place in society now. She slowly left her job because of her husband and because of the cultural expectations, and so now she's kind of unsure as to what to do now that he is gone. We see her relationships with her family, her mother who lives with her sister, and the difficulties of those relationships. And she also travels to Tibet, which is somewhere that her husband had gone just before he died. Our main character is also an artist, and her painting this water world is part of the story as well. She's commissioned to paint a mural, and as she starts to paint this water world, and there is a bleeding in between reality and the painting and this sort of strange world that she goes to. It's a short book, and as I said, written in a very detached, unconnected style, which I think really lends itself to that wintry feeling. It is one that feels almost like it's under glass or in an aquarium, which is one of the images that does recur in this book. It's not a book that will give you a lot of answers. It is definitely a just vibes book, but I really enjoyed it. I think the atmosphere is really wonderful, and the strangeness of it all, if you allow yourself to sort of sink into that, I think it works very well. The next one I want to talk about definitely does not have cozy winter vibes. This is a very cold, emotional, difficult book. and that is The Discomfort of Evening by Lucas Rijneveld. And I read this year and I was blown away by it. I thought it was an amazing book, but it's definitely a difficult read. So if you need trigger warnings, I would look them up. It is told from the perspective of a preteen girl who has recently lost her brother in an ice skating accident. So it is set in winter, and they live in a small town in the Netherlands that is a very religious place, and it is about her family, and they're dealing with grief and they're coming to terms with grief. But this is a strange family living in a strange insular community, and strange things happen. They live on a small farm. This girl is kind of left to her own devices. She's not really parented, but she is very much shamed. There is a lot of shame and silence going on. She kind of feels like she's responsible for her brother's death, and that manifests in various different, very uncomfortable ways. So it is a dark book, as I said, and it's written in this really detached style, which I thought wouldn't be for me, but I think really works, because we are being told entirely from the perspective of this young girl, and her detachment feels like a disassociation, like it is part of her reaction to the trauma. And for me, that really works to build the story. I think it's really wonderfully told, and probably one of the books that has most shocked me. It does so without feeling like it's there for shock value. It doesn't feel like the writer is standing over you trying to make you shocked. It feels like this is true to the characters and is coming out of the position and the world that they are in, which is much my preference. I thought it was wonderful and so powerful and so moving, but yeah, very dark and difficult. So if you don't like dark, difficult books, I wouldn't read that one. But if you think you can handle it, I definitely think it's one of the better ones. A book that is set over a very long time period, so definitely isn't just winter, is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline. This is a story about a young girl and her mother living in Canada, whose father has gone to Hong Kong and gone missing. And at the same time, a woman who is her aunt, cousin, some sort of relation she's not really sure about and has never met before, comes to Canada fleeing from China after the Tiananmen Square massacre. The young woman who has fled from China tells the young girl the story of their family and what happened to them during the Maoist Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, and on into the Tiananmen Square protests over the course of 20th century Chinese history. And we see what has happened to her father as well at the same time. It is a story that a lot of the characters are musicians, and there are secret bookshops and writers involved as well. And so there is also a lot of mathematicians. So there is themes of art and maths and of passing those down through families as well, and of mysteries and a lot of Chinese history, which I found was really moving. It's a very slow-moving book, despite covering such a large period of time, and the connections between the characters and their relationships are a very important part of it, and I really enjoyed them. I thought it was a book that really felt like it immersed me in that time period and that place, which is something that I particularly love to read about in winter. I think it's great to get lost in a book on dark, cold nights, and I think something about the kind of melancholy, again, slightly detached style of this, I think that people who liked Pachinko would like this, but I preferred this to Pachinko. I thought it had a little more depth and complexity in regards to the characters. And then finally on my list is a classic. I definitely think classics feel like winter a lot of the time, and the one I would like to recommend is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This has been described to me before, and by me on this channel I think before, as Pride and Prejudice for socialists, because it is a love story between kind of enemies to lovers, if you're using romance tropes, but it's not really that love story. Much like in Pride and Prejudice, the love story is the hanger on which social criticism and satire is, well, satire in terms of Pride and Prejudice, kind of criticism and analysis in terms of North and South. The romance is the frame on which this is hung, rather than being the core to the story. I wouldn't describe either of them as romance books. There is much more to them than just the romance. But North and South is about a young woman from the south of England whose father is kind of excommunicated from the Church of England because he has more radical ideas, and they end up moving to a parish in a northern town, Milltown, but I think it's based on Manchester, and where they come into contact with the head of one of the mills, and also with some of the workers in the mills, and strike action and the beginning of the labour movement. And so whilst these two people, the head of the the head of the factory, who is kind of middle class because he is earning his money in trade, and whereas she is part of the gentry because she is from a more sort of genteel background. So you have three different classes and the changing roles of the classes system in the 19th century. It really does go into what life was like for workers, and goes into the beginnings of the labour movement, but from this kind of outsider perspective, which I think makes it easy to understand. It's not too complicated, but it does have a lot of depth to it, and I really, really love that about it. I think it's an excellent classic. If you're someone who's like getting into classics, but you have read Jane Austen, I feel like it's not any more inaccessible than that. And it has two great characters at the centre who are really interestingly developed, and Margaret Hale, our main character, her growth and her learning and her understanding from such a sheltered background to what the rest of the world is like is a really important part of the book, and I think a really great entry point as well, as I said. So those are 10 books that to me feel like winter that I am telling you about on this very snowy day. On another note, I am planning to do a personalised book recommendations video that I tend to do at this time of year. So if you want any recommendations for me, also let me know in the comments down below. I'll probably put a post on the community tab and maybe talk about it in another video as well. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week most of the time, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.